You know that feeling, right? If you've ever been on a plane, you definitely do. That sudden dip, the shake of the plane, turbulence. It can be a little unnerving for sure, but what if we could swap that anxiety for a little bit of, well, understanding? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the invisible forces that cause those bumps in the sky. So next time, you'll feel less alarm and maybe a little more awe. Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to start with what turbulence is, fundamentally. Then we'll get into the physics of why the air isn't always this smooth highway. After that, we'll dive into a really cool idea called the energy cascade. See how pilots actually navigate all this, and then we'll finish up with the one thing you can do to make your flight as safe as possible. All right, so let's start with something we've all felt. That feeling. The shakes, the bumps. But what is actually going on up there? It just feels so random, doesn't it? One minute you're cruising along, everything's smooth, and the next you're feeling that jolt. You look out the window and the sky looks perfectly clear, but the plane is definitely getting jostled around. So what's causing that invisible disturbance? Well, here's the official take from the Federal Aviation Administration. They basically say it's air movement you can't see, and it often pops up out of nowhere. The best way to think about it is like invisible rapids in a river. The sky is an empty space, it's a fluid. And just like a river has currents and eddies, the atmosphere has jet streams, pressure systems, and even air flowing over mountains that create these invisible waves. Your plane is just flying right through them. Okay, to really wrap our heads around this, we gotta dip into some basic physics that explains how any fluid, and that includes air, actually moves. So, airflow really has two different personalities. On one hand, you've got laminar flow. Think of how honey pours out of a jar. It's smooth, it's predictable, it moves in these nice, neat layers. That's because the natural stickiness of a fluid is in charge. But then, on the other hand, you get turbulent flow. This is more like a raging river hitting a bunch of rocks. It's chaotic, it's swirling with eddies, totally unpredictable. This happens when the fluid's momentum, its inertia, overpowers that stickiness. So what's the switch? What flips the air from smooth to chaotic? It all comes down to something called the Reynolds number. Now, don't worry about the math, but just know it's a single number that tells scientists exactly when a fluid is going to stop being smooth and start getting turbulent. And here's the key. For the air flowing over the wing of a huge passenger jet that's moving super fast, the Reynolds number is gigantic. What this all means is that for a plane, a little bit of turbulence isn't just possible, it's pretty much the air's natural state. Okay, so we know it's chaotic, but here's the cool part. There's actually a hidden order inside all that chaos, a kind of beautiful structure to it. And the person we have to thank for this insight is this guy, A.N. Kolmogorov, a brilliant Russian mathematician back in the 1940s. He figured out that the energy in a turbulent system isn't just a random mess. It actually follows a really predictable path. His big idea is something called the energy cascade. And honestly, it's such a great way to picture what's happening. Just imagine energy is like water at the top of a waterfall. It starts as this one big, powerful flow. But as it tumbles down the steps, it breaks up into smaller and smaller streams until at the very bottom it's just tiny little trickles. And that, right there, is exactly what's happening in the air. The water is kinetic energy, and the steps are these swirling pockets of air we call eddies. So a big gust of wind creates a huge, powerful eddy. But that eddy is unstable, so it breaks apart, and it passes its energy down to smaller eddies. And those break apart into even smaller ones, and so on and so on. This graph kind of lays it all out. See up at the top right? That's where big things like wind gusts are pumping energy into the system, creating those really big eddies. Now follow the arrow as it goes down. The energy is cascading down to smaller and smaller eddies. And all the way at the bottom left, the eddies get so tiny that the air's natural stickiness finally takes over and smooths everything out, turning that leftover energy into a tiny bit of heat. The bumps your plane feels, that's from the bigger eddies, right in the middle of that cascade. So that's the deep science stuff, which is pretty amazing, right? But how does all this talk about energy cascades actually help in the cockpit? How do pilots deal with it? Well, it's not guesswork, that's for sure. It's a super professional, data-driven process. First off, it all starts on the ground with really detailed weather and turbulence forecasts. Then, in the air, one of the best moves is just to change altitude. Sometimes climbing or descending just a few thousand feet can get you into a much smoother layer of air. And maybe, most importantly, pilots are constantly talking to air traffic control and listening to reports from planes up ahead, building this real-time map of the smoothest ride.
But the real curveball, the thing that poses a unique challenge, is something called clear air turbulence, or CAT. Just like the name says, it's totally invisible. There are no storm clouds to warn you. And this is where all that modern forecasting and the real-time pilot reports become absolutely critical to finding a smooth path through a perfectly blue sky. So pilots and forecasters are doing their part, but believe it or not, there's one person who has the most control over their own safety when things get bumpy, and that's you.
Okay, let's actually look at the numbers here, straight from the FAA. These are the serious injuries from turbulence over a 15-year span. Now, first thing to notice, these numbers are really, really low when you think about the millions of people flying every single day. But they're not zero, and when you look closer, there's a fascinating pattern in here about who's most at risk. I mean, look at this. Over that whole period, there were 166 serious injuries to crew members, but only 40 to passengers. Why the huge difference? It's actually pretty simple. Flight attendants are often up on their feet doing their jobs when unexpected turbulence hits. Passengers, on the other hand, are mostly seated. This data tells a really powerful story. And here's the absolute most important takeaway from all of this. While turbulence is a normal part of flying, injuries from it are almost completely preventable. Let me be super clear. Turbulence is not a danger to the plane itself. These machines are built to withstand way more force than they'll ever encounter. The danger isn't to the plane, it's to people and things inside the cabin that aren't strapped down. And this all leads to the one thing, the single most effective thing you can do to stay safe, and it's so simple. The FAA says it loud and clear. Keep your seatbelt buckled whenever you are seated. Even if the seatbelt sign is off, just keeping it loosely fastened across your lap protects you from that sudden, unexpected jolt. It is the easiest and most powerful thing you can do. So the next time you're on a flight and you feel those bumps, maybe you won't feel that little jolt of anxiety. Maybe, instead, you'll picture that incredible energy cascade, a huge, invisible river of air, with eddies of energy tumbling from large to small. And you can just marvel at the fact that you are safely flying right through the heart of it all.